The first scream wasn't a voice. It was the shriek of tires ripping across flooded pavement, a black Tesla fishtailing onto the curb as rain hammered Chicago's magnificent mile. Headlights cut white scars through the downpour, doors slammed, footsteps splashed, and then came that heavy city silence that isn't silence at all, just the storm swallowing everything human. She lay on the boutique steps, crumpled and small against cold stone, hair plastered to her cheeks, one hand dangling in the water as if the rain itself had dragged her there. People saw her. They always saw. They just didn't stop, umbrellas tilted, eyes averted, bodies slipping by like shadows with wallets. One man stopped. Ethan Blackwell stepped from the car, expensive shoes sinking into a gutter that didn't care who he was. The suit, the meetings, the headlines, none of it mattered in the wet glare of those lights. He dropped to his knees, rain pouring off his sleeves as he touched her shoulder. "Hey. Can you hear me?" His voice broke against thunder. She stirred. Barely. Lips trembled, skin so cold it felt like glass. He yanked off his jacket and wrapped her in it, fingers fumbling the phone from his pocket. Then the streetlight above them flickered, the light thinning and hardening like a blade, and he saw her face. Claire. The name tore up his throat and froze there. 15 years of trying not to remember collapsed in a single breath. Claire Donovan, the girl who painted sunrise into every ugly wall, who laughed under winter street lamps, who vanished like a door that never existed. He had built skyscrapers on top of her absence. He had learned to breathe without the part of his chest she occupied. But there she was. Not a memory. Not a ghost. A shaking, soaked, breakable fact. Sirens wailed somewhere behind the rain. Ethan leaned close, brushing wet hair from her mouth. "Claire. Stay with me. Stay with me." Her lips parted. The voice that came out was thin and cracked and unstoppable. "Find Noah." He blinked rain and shock away. "Who?" "He's your son." The words hit like a blow that didn't end, impact, then pressure, then the weight of 1,000 things tipping over in the dark. He sagged back, breath gone. His son? No. It didn't make sense. 15 years lost and now this. But her eyes, God, her eyes, were full of the kind of fear that didn't lie. The ambulance flooded the street with red and blue, paramedics moving fast, efficient, talking past him as they lifted her. Claire's hand shot out and clamped around his wrist, fingernails biting. "Don't let them take him," she rasped, each word scraping the storm. "Please." They pried her fingers loose. The doors slammed. The siren wound up and the ambulance tunneled into the rain, its light smearing across glass and water until it was just a rumor of color. Ethan stood in the runoff, jacket gone, suit ruined, the hard shell of his life split open. Claire was alive. Claire was dying. Somewhere in this city there might be a boy with his blood in her eyes and a name he'd never spoken out loud. Noah. He tried it in his head and felt the floor tilt again. If someone you loved collapsed with a secret that could destroy your life, would you face it or flinch? Comment where you're watching from. The rain thickened, pushing people faster. A doorman shouted at a delivery rider, a taxi sloshed a sheet of water over Ethan's shoes, a pair of tourists laughed as they ran, not unkind, just far away. The city never paused for private earthquakes. He pulled his phone back out and stared at nothing on the screen while memory unspooled without permission, Claire's fingers stained with Prussian blue, her cheek pressed to a window while snow taped the glass, the morning she said nothing for so long he mistook it for peace. Then a gap where years should have been. He had explained that gap with work, with flight numbers, with signatures on glass tables in rooms without clocks. He had bought silence. He had worn it like a medal. Tonight it felt like a crime scene. Noah. There was a boy in that name even if there wasn't one in the world, and the thought crushed his lungs. If Claire had fallen this far, what chance did a kid have? He pictured foster homes with hallways that smelled like bleach and fear, couches where sleep wasn't sleep, hands that weren't gentle. He pictured alleys and corners and fast talk and choices you only make when no one's coming back for you. He pictured eyes closing on a different kind of cold. He couldn't stand still anymore. He slid into the Tesla, slammed the door on the weather, and sat with rain punching the windshield. The hospital. Which one? He stabbed 911 again, rerouted to dispatch, asked, barked, demanded. Words slipped through his fingers. He was the man who could make a transatlantic bank change policy with a phone call, and he couldn't find one woman in a city where he owned half the sky. He took a breath that didn't help and started the car. The wipers carved tunnels through the storm. The map said Northwestern Memorial and he let it. Lights smeared, lanes vanished, horns bloomed and died. He drove like a person underwater. At a red light that didn't matter, the city opened a door in his head and shoved him into the old apartment, the good one with the bad wiring, where Claire had once painted a bird across a cracked wall just to make the room feel like it had windows. "You always leave early," she had said one morning without looking at him. He had laughed because it sounded like a joke. By the time he understood it wasn't, she was gone. Hospitals look the same when you arrive wet and haunted. Fluorescence. Floor polish. Faces that don't have time for your story. He parked wrong and didn't care, jogged through glass doors, left a lake at the reception desk. A woman. Claire Donovan. Just brought in. The clerk typed like judgment. "Are you family?" He opened his mouth and realized he didn't know the answer. He said, yes, because he couldn't say anything else. "They are." Through those doors. The doors breathed him into a brighter, colder world. Nurses moved like weather fronts. A gurney ghosted past with someone else's emergency on it. Ethan tried to catch a name, a glance, a clue. Nothing gave. He saw his reflection in a stainless panel and didn't know the man looking back. A voice said his name and for a crazy half-second he thought Claire had simply stood up and remembered how to be fine. Instead, it was a doctor with wet cuffs and calm eyes, the kind of calm you don't want. "She's critical," the doctor said, marks bleeding from his mask onto his cheeks. "We're working. That's all I can tell you right now." Ethan nodded at the floor because he couldn't nod at the truth. She said, "There's a boy." The word felt too small. "Noah." The doctor didn't answer the thing Ethan was actually asking. "If you're family, wait in the lounge. We'll update you." The lounge was a box of soft chairs and hard time. A TV murmured about a storm as if the storm were the news. A vending machine hummed sugar. Ethan sat and didn't. He replayed Claire's grip like a loop, the heat of her panic, the bruise of her nails. Don't let them take him. From who? From what? He pictured lawyers, caseworkers, men who called themselves friends with smiles like locks. He pictured his last name in somebody else's mouth. He pulled up the People Finder contacts he paid to keep in his pocket and typed Noah with hands that wouldn't steady. Too many results. Not enough. He added Donovan. Fewer. He added Chicago. Enough to drown in. He added the year. The years. 15. 14. 13. Every number felt like a blade shaving off time he couldn't get back. He set the phone down and pressed his fists into his eyes until stars broke behind them. He could feel the moment when money would become a weapon and still not be enough. He could feel the part of him that made deals trying to stand up and negotiate with fate. A nurse passed. He stood. "Please. Claire Donovan." The nurse checked a screen with the care you give a bomb. "She's in surgery." The word opened a pit under his feet and asked him to step in. He didn't. He sat again and tried to make the room hold still. It wouldn't. The storm hammered the windows and he realized it wasn't the weather. It was the city itself reminding him that he didn't own anything that mattered. He thought of a boy who might be asleep on a couch that smelled like strangers, a boy who might be watching a door that never opened, a boy who had never been told his father's name. He thought of the way kids learn to make their faces quiet. He thought of how fast the wrong people move when they smell a secret. If you'd fight for that child before the truth erases him, stay with me. Comment where you're watching from. He stood again because sitting felt like consent. He left the lounge and moved down a corridor that didn't want him, found a window with a view of rain and a city that had decided to test him tonight. He pressed his forehead to the glass until the cold traveled through bone. "I'm coming," he said to nobody and to one person exactly. He meant it the way people mean promises in burning buildings. Behind him, footsteps slowed. He turned. A security guard hovered in the doorway, hat dark with water, a clipboard hugged to his chest as if it needed comfort. The man looked at Ethan like a person deciding whether to open their hand or their mouth. "I think," the guard said slowly, "we've got something you need to see." He glanced down at the clipboard, then back up with a careful kind of pity. When they brought her in, she had a note in her coat. He tapped the folder once, a small sound in a large night. "It's crumpled. It's wet. But there's a name on it. And an address." The guard swallowed, choosing the softest way to drop a weight. "It's not hers." He lifted the paper as if it could shatter. "It's the boy's." The paper felt heavier than it should. Ink bled into the wrinkles, edges shredded by rain, but one thing stood out like a scar that wouldn't fade: Noah. Beneath it, slanted handwriting gave an address: 63rd Street, South Side Chicago. Ethan stared at it until the letters blurred. The world around him, the buzzing lights, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the receptionists typing, faded into static. Only the name remained. A boy's name. A boy who might be his. The guard cleared his throat, uneasy. It was folded tight in her coat. Almost like she didn't trust her voice to get it across. "Figured you should have it." Ethan slid the note into his breast pocket. The weight there was unbearable, as though his chest couldn't hold it. He nodded, but his mouth didn't work. The guard left. The lounge was still full of stale coffee and false comfort when he returned. A woman flipped through a magazine without seeing it. A man rocked his knee as if the rhythm might keep him from falling apart. Ethan sat but couldn't stay still. His leg bounced, his fingers tapped, his heart beat too hard for his ribs. The television muttered about flash floods. He wasn't listening. He was replaying Claire's eyes, wide with terror. "Don't let them take him." Who? Who would take a boy like Noah? Ethan pressed his palms together until they hurt. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about markets or mergers. He was thinking about a couch that smelled like strangers. About hands that weren't gentle. About alleys that swallowed boys whole. And here's where I'll ask you watching this: if someone told you your child was lost in a part of the city you'd never walked, would you go? Or would you turn away and pretend you hadn't heard? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. A nurse passed, her face unreadable. Ethan stopped her. "Claire Donovan." "She's in surgery," the nurse said. "It's critical." The word dug into him. He sat again, but the chair felt like punishment. He wanted to move, to run, to find, to fix. He wanted to walk through every hallway until he found the boy himself. His phone buzzed. A message from Rod, his investigator, someone who always knew how to look where others didn't. Ethan typed with stiff hands, "Find Noah. Mail. 14. 15. South Side address, 63rd Street. Connected to Claire Donovan." Quiet. Rod replied in seconds, "You're asking me to find a ghost in a graveyard. But I'll start." Ethan pressed the note against his thigh. The ink left faint stains on his palm, like a signature that branded itself into him. He imagined the boy who had written or carried it. Did Noah know his name? Did he know he had a father? Or was Ethan just another stranger chasing him through the rain? The clock ticked. The vending machine hummed. He couldn't breathe. Finally, he stood. Staying here felt like betrayal. Claire had given him the name, the address, the plea. What good was he to her if he didn't move? The city was pale with dawn when he stepped outside. The storm had thinned, leaving streets glistening with water. He climbed into the Tesla, set the address in his navigation, and sat for a moment with the engine humming. Downtown's glass towers shrank in the rear view as he drove south. High-rises gave way to warehouses, warehouses to sagging homes with rusted gates. Storefronts with broken neon signs sat beside churches with chipped paint. The city peeled itself back layer by layer until he was driving through a place he had never let himself imagine. He slowed at a red light, his eyes catching the faces on the corners. Men leaning against lampposts, hands in pockets, watching him. A group of kids tossing a ball between cracked sidewalks. A woman clutching grocery bags too light to last the week. Every glance said the same thing: he didn't belong here. He gripped the wheel tighter. Noah belonged here, or had been forced to. That was all that mattered. The navigation arrow pointed left, and there it was, a house slumped against itself on 63rd Street. The paint peeled, the porch sagged, the windows hid behind metal bars. A battered SUV sat crooked in the driveway, its windshield cracked. Ethan parked a block away. His suit jacket clung damp to his skin. The note in his pocket felt alive. He walked up the steps. The wood groaned under his weight. He knocked. The door opened a crack. A woman peered out, scarf tied over her hair, eyes sharp with suspicion. "What do you want?" "I'm looking for Noah," Ethan said. His voice caught halfway through the name. Her eyes narrowed. "You the state social worker?" "No." "Then you're nobody." She started to shut the door. "Please," he said, catching it with his palm. "Claire Donovan sent me." The name froze her. She studied him, eyes darting from his wet hair to his shoes. Finally, she spoke. "You got nerve saying that name here." "Is Noah here?" Ethan asked. Her lips pressed into a hard line. "He was. 2 nights ago. Then he ran. Or someone took him. Nobody tells me the truth." The words gutted him. He forced his breath steady. Where would he go? The woman's eyes darted past him to the street, then back. "Kids like him? They disappear. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't. South Side doesn't keep score." She started to close the door again, but something in her expression flickered, guilt, maybe fear. She sighed and shoved something through the crack. A scrap of paper, folded and thin. He left this under his pillow. Said it was nothing. Kids always keep the dumbest things. Ethan unfolded it. A rough drawing, shaky but clear. A small park. A bridge. And in the corner, written in a different hand, 6:40. He looked at his watch. 6:35. The woman shut the door without another word. Ethan stood on the porch with the paper trembling in his hands. A map. A meeting place. Maybe a lifeline. His heart thudded like a war drum. He turned and ran back toward the car, splashing through puddles, gripping the note so tightly it crumpled. The sun pushed a weak light between the clouds as he reached the Tesla. He slid inside, started the engine, and punched the accelerator. 2 blocks east. A park with a bridge. And maybe, finally, the boy who carried his name without ever knowing it. If you think you drive straight to that bridge without blinking, stay with me. Comment where you're watching from so I know you're here. The Tesla ate the blocks like a predator on a leash, its quiet hum at odds with the pounding in Ethan's chest. The map was crushed in his hand, the ink smudging against his palm. 6:40, He glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:38, 2 minutes. 2 minutes to step into the unknown. He turned the corner, the navigation arrow pointing straight into a forgotten park. Grass overgrown, swings rusted, the basketball court cracked into jagged pieces. The place smelled of wet earth and old neglect. And there it was, the bridge. A narrow strip of concrete arching over a drainage canal, fog coiling above the water like smoke from a wound. A figure leaned on the railing halfway across, hood drawn, shoulders narrow. Ethan's breath caught. He pulled the car to the curb, killed the engine, and stepped out. The morning was too quiet, the city's usual roar muffled here, replaced by the steady drip of water from the bridge. He walked slowly, his shoes crunching against gravel, the map trembling in his grip. The figure didn't move. Noah. His voice cracked like glass. The hood turned. A boy's face. 13, maybe 14. Eyes sharp, wary, the kind of eyes that had already learned the world was dangerous. Eyes Ethan had never seen and yet recognized instantly, because they were his own. For a moment, time stopped. Ethan wanted to rush forward, to close the space between them, to pour out the truth until the boy believed it. But he couldn't. The way Noah stood, tense, ready to bolt, told him the wrong move would scatter everything. Noah's voice was hoarse, cautious. "Who are you?" The question landed like a blade. Ethan opened his mouth, but the answer was too heavy. "Your father." He couldn't say it. Not here. Not now. Instead, a friend of Claire's. Noah's face twitched, a flash of something, fear, pain, anger. "She's dead." "No," Ethan said quickly, stepping forward, hands raised in surrender. "She's fighting. She wanted me to find you." Noah's lips pressed tight, his jaw locking. He looked back at the water, as if it might answer for him. "She shouldn't have done that." Ethan froze. "Why?" "Because now they'll come." The words hit him harder than the storm the night before. "Who?" But Noah didn't answer. He pushed off the railing, the movement quick, nervous. Ethan's chest burned with the instinct to protect, but before he could take another step, a sound echoed from the far end of the park. The low growl of an engine. A dark sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the fog. The doors opened slowly. Two men stepped out, broad-shouldered, dressed in clothes that didn't belong in this part of the city, moving with the kind of calm that spelled danger. Noah's eyes widened. He stepped back, bumping against the railing. Ethan turned, body tense. His mind screamed at him, this wasn't a boardroom, this wasn't a negotiation. This was raw, ugly power walking toward him, and he had nothing to fight with except the truth burning in his chest. One of the men spoke, his voice casual but cold. "You're lost, sir. This isn't your street." Ethan held his ground. "I'm here for the boy." The man's smile was small and sharp. "That's funny. Because so are we." Noah's breath came fast. His hands curled into fists. Ethan could see the panic building in him, the fight or flight tearing through his small frame. Ethan stepped forward, shielding him. "He's not going with you." The second man tilted his head, studying him like an equation. "And who are you to say that?" The answer trembled at the edge of Ethan's tongue. "His father." He wanted to scream it, to make it real, to drive them back with the weight of it. But the word stuck, too dangerous, too fragile to release in this moment. "Instead, someone who won't let you take him." The first man chuckled, the sound as dry as gravel. "Brave. Stupid. Same thing in the end." He reached into his coat. Ethan's pulse spiked. Noah flinched, his eyes darting toward the opposite side of the bridge, calculating escape. Ethan whispered, barely moving his lips, "Run." But Noah didn't. His eyes stayed locked on the men, wide with terror. He was frozen, the way kids freeze when they've already run too many times. The man's hand emerged, not a gun, not yet, but a phone. He tapped the screen, muttered something into it, then slid it back into his pocket. "Orders are coming." Ethan's skin prickled. He didn't know what those orders meant, but they were bad. Worse than anything his imagination could supply. He leaned closer to Noah, his voice a low urgency. "Listen to me. Whatever happens, stay behind me. Don't move unless I tell you. Understand?" Noah hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Ethan's heart clenched. The boy's trust was a fragile thing, hanging by a thread, but it was there. The men stepped closer, their boots thudding against the bridge. Ethan braced himself, his mind racing through every deal, every threat, every bluff he'd ever made. None of it mattered here. This wasn't numbers on a page. This was flesh and blood. And the boy behind him. If this was you, facing down strangers in the fog while a child clung to you for safety, would you stand your ground? Or would you hand him over, hoping to survive? Comment where you're watching from. The first man stopped a few feet away. Last chance. Walk away. Forget the kid. Nobody needs to know you were here. Ethan swallowed hard. That's not going to happen. The man sighed. Shame. Behind him, the second man shifted, his hand dipping into his coat again, slower this time, deliberate. Ethan's instincts screamed, but before anything else could happen, a voice cut through the fog. Enough. All three turned. From the shadows near the basketball court, another figure emerged. Broad shoulders, heavy jacket, a gait that was all too familiar. Ethan's stomach dropped. His brother, Mason. The last time Ethan had seen him was over a decade ago, in a courtroom hallway. Mason had walked out in cuffs, and Ethan had walked away, pretending they weren't cut from the same cloth. Now Mason's eyes locked on his, unreadable. "You don't belong here, Ethan," he said. But the boy does. The air tightened like a noose. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Claire's plea, the note, the map, the boy, it all funneled into this moment. Mason stepped closer, the fog curling around him like smoke. "If you want him," he said, his voice low, dangerous, "you'll have to go through me." The Tesla's tires whispered across cracked asphalt, the city thinning into a silence that wasn't silence at all. Abandoned storefronts hunched beside liquor stores still lit, neon bleeding into puddles. Ethan gripped the wheel, the map on the seat beside him. The hand-drawn park, the crude outline of a bridge, the crooked heart in the corner. The time scrawled beneath it, 6:40. The dashboard clock glowed, 6:38. He turned the corner and the world opened into a forgotten park. Grass grew wild around rusted swings, benches leaned into themselves, and the chain nets of the basketball court sagged like cobwebs. At the center, cutting through the mist, stood a narrow bridge over a drainage canal. A figure leaned against the railing. Hood pulled low. Shoulders narrow. Ethan slowed. The boy didn't move. He stepped out, leaving the car door ajar, heart punching against his ribs. The morning air smelled of wet iron. Gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he approached. The boy lifted his head just enough. Eyes glinted beneath the hood. Ethan stopped. He knew those eyes. The resemblance was undeniable, and it hollowed him out in an instant. The same shape, the same dark burn. His own eyes staring back, only younger, sharper, and edged with suspicion that had taken years to harden. The boy, Noah, shifted, hands gripping the railing as if it were the only thing holding him steady. His chest rose and fell too fast. He didn't speak, didn't welcome, didn't run. He just watched. Ethan's throat worked. Every instinct screamed to rush forward, to claim the moment, to close the gap. But the way Noah's shoulders tightened kept him still. One wrong move and the boy would vanish into the mist. The silence stretched. Behind them, the city murmured distantly, tires, sirens, a shout swallowed by distance. Here, time had narrowed into two heartbeats facing each other across 10 feet of concrete. Ethan opened his mouth, but before a word could escape, the sound came. An engine. Low, heavy, deliberate. Headlights split the fog at the far end of the park. A sedan rolled in, black paint reflecting nothing, moving slow like it already owned the ground. It stopped just beyond the basketball court. Two doors opened in unison. The men who stepped out weren't locals. Their clothes were too clean, their movements too precise. They didn't glance around because they didn't need to. Predators never do. Noah stiffened. His fingers whitened against the railing. Ethan felt the boy's fear like a current running straight into his chest. The men walked toward the bridge, boots heavy against damp pavement. Ethan shifted slightly, placing himself in front of Noah. His body made the choice before his mind caught up. He didn't think about money, about power, about all the tools that usually bent the world his way. None of them worked here. This was only skin and blood and the will to stand. One of the men stopped a few paces away. He tilted his head, studying Ethan like a misplaced object. His mouth curled, not quite a smile. The other lingered at his side, hand near his jacket, waiting. The silence was worse than words. Ethan's breath burned his throat. The bridge creaked faintly beneath their weight, the canal below swallowing the first pale light of morning. Noah shifted behind him, but not away. The boy stayed close, and that small choice carved something deep in Ethan. If this were you, if a child clung to the space behind your back while strangers advanced through the fog, would you stand your ground? Or would you surrender? Tell me where you're watching from. The first man's gaze slid past Ethan to Noah. Something in his eyes tightened, like recognition. That was enough. Ethan stepped forward, blocking the line of sight. A thin laugh escaped the man's throat, quiet, mocking. He lifted his hand, not fast, not threatening, yet. A signal. The second man adjusted his stance, the kind of adjustment that preludes violence. Ethan braced, every nerve burning. He'd been in fights before, different kinds, the kind fought with pens and contracts, but never this. Never the kind where losing meant flesh and bone. And then, from the mist beyond the court, another sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. A figure emerged, shoulders squared, jacket hanging loose, face still in shadow. Ethan's stomach knotted even before the man's features sharpened into focus. Mason. His brother. The years hadn't softened him. If anything, they'd carved him sharper, eyes harder, jaw set like stone. His presence shifted the entire scene, the two men stepping back slightly as though even predators gave him space. Mason's gaze found Ethan, lingered, then dropped to the boy. His lips twitched, something between curiosity and claim. He spoke at last, voice carrying across the fog-draped bridge. You shouldn't be here, Ethan. The weight of the words slammed into him. Mason hadn't said you can't. He hadn't said you won't. He had said shouldn't. As if rules existed Ethan had never known, as if the city itself had laws only Mason understood. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wanted to answer, to demand, to shout, but the moment held him like a trap. Noah's presence behind him, Mason's ahead, the strangers at the edges, it was a battlefield drawn without permission. The boy shifted again, his breath sharp. Ethan could feel him, pressed into the space he offered, trembling but refusing to step away. And that, more than anything, told Ethan what had to come next. Mason stood in the fog like he had grown from it, shoulders squared, jacket hanging loose, face carved with years that had hardened instead of healed. The men who had arrived earlier shifted back a step, as if even predators recognized a bigger one when he entered the clearing. Ethan's chest locked. Time collapsed into fragments, the last courtroom hallway, Mason in cuffs, Ethan walking away without turning back. 15 years, erased in a single glance. The bridge was suddenly too narrow. Noah's breath shook behind him. The two strangers loitered at the edge, but all of it bent toward Mason's arrival. He walked closer, boots pressing water into the cracks of concrete. His eyes flicked to Noah, long enough to sting, short enough to claim. Then back to Ethan. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's fingers curled, nails pressing crescents into his palms. The words weren't a threat. They were a rule. A law Mason carried like gospel. "You know him," Ethan said, the statement breaking into the damp air. Mason didn't answer right away. He looked at the boy again, then at the water below, mist wrapping him like smoke. "Finally, I know what happens to kids like him when the wrong people find out who they belong to." The words tightened Ethan's spine. "And you're one of those wrong people." Mason's jaw flexed. He didn't deny it. Noah shifted, shoes scraping against the concrete. Ethan could feel his fear pressing into his back. The boy wanted to bolt but didn't. Mason noticed it too. His gaze lingered on Noah's posture, on the sharp edge of a child who had already learned to stand like prey. "Claire shouldn't have brought you into this," Mason said, his tone almost weary. "She knew better." Ethan's throat burned. "She trusted me." "She's dying, Ethan," Mason snapped, the first crack in his control. "Dying people trust anyone. It doesn't make it wise." The silence after was heavier than the fog. Ethan took one step forward, closing the space between them by an inch. "If you know where he is, if you've had anything to do with this, tell me." Mason's eyes met his, unblinking. "You still think you're owed answers?" "You always did." The memory cut deep, late nights when their father's shadow stretched over them both, Ethan chasing approval with grades and deals, Mason chasing rebellion with fists and fire. Ethan had walked into the light, Mason had stayed in the dark. Both of them had been scarred, only in different ways. Now the scars had names: Claire, Noah. The two men from the sedan shifted again, impatient. One muttered, "Time's running." Mason silenced him with a glance. They stilled, leashed by nothing more than his eyes. That was Mason. Always commanding rooms he didn't own. Always bending men to his will. "You want the boy," Mason said at last, his voice low, deliberate. "But wanting and keeping aren't the same. You step further into this, and the ground disappears under you. You've lived in towers too long to know what falling feels like." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then let me learn." For the first time, Mason almost smiled. It wasn't warmth, it was recognition. Always stubborn. Always pretending you can fight storms by standing still. He moved closer, boots scraping. Ethan could smell the faint sting of cigarettes clinging to his jacket, could see the lines etched around his mouth. Lines earned, not given. "I won't let you near him," Mason said. "Not yet." Ethan's blood surged. "You don't get to decide that." "Don't I?" Mason leaned in, his breath harsh. "Who do you think's been keeping him alive all this time?" The words staggered Ethan. The ground felt thinner beneath his feet. Mason's presence here wasn't coincidence, it was design. He hadn't just stumbled across Noah. He'd been there. Watching. Shielding, or manipulating. Ethan's voice was a rasp. "Why?" Mason's eyes darkened. "Because you weren't." The sentence landed harder than any blow. If someone threw those words at you, that you had abandoned your own blood, left him unprotected, could you carry it? Or would it break you? "Tell me where you're watching from." Noah's breathing spiked. He pressed against the railing, eyes darting between them. The boy didn't understand the history, but he felt the heat of it, the danger coiling tighter. Mason noticed. His tone softened a fraction. "He doesn't need you right now, Ethan. He needs to survive. And survival here isn't a father's love, it's choices you can't make." Ethan shook his head. You think I'll walk away? After Claire begged me to find him? Mason's face hardened again. Claire begged you to survive her mess. Don't twist her last words into your redemption. The men at the edge shifted once more, impatient wolves circling a fire. Mason raised a hand and they stilled, waiting for his call. The mist thickened, curling over the bridge, wrapping the three of them into a private stage. Ethan felt the truth pressing down. This wasn't just about finding Noah anymore. It was about Mason, about the fracture between them that had grown into a chasm. And now that chasm had a boy standing on its edge. Mason turned, his silhouette fading into fog. Go home, Ethan. Before this place eats you alive. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked away, the two men falling in step behind him. Their footsteps faded into the park until only the drip of water remained. Ethan stood frozen, chest heaving, the boy's trembling breath still pressing into his back. He turned slightly, just enough to see Noah's wide eyes staring up at him. The boy didn't speak. He didn't need to. The question was in his gaze, raw and unbearable. Who are you? Ethan had no answer yet. But the silence told him the truth. Whatever Mason knew, whatever Mason had done, the battle for Noah had only begun. The streets outside the diner were washed in pale light, slick with rain, the sky bruised with dawn. Ethan led Noah to the car, every step heavy with the sense that eyes followed them from unseen corners. He opened the passenger door. Noah slid in without looking at him. The Tesla hummed as it pulled onto the road, quiet but not calm. The city stretched ahead, endless blocks of cracked sidewalks, boarded windows, and faces that measured strangers by what they could take from them. Ethan drove like a man inside enemy lines. Noah kept his hood low, hands tucked into the sleeves of his sweatshirt. He didn't ask where they were going. He didn't ask who Ethan was. Silence pressed between them, thick as smoke. Ethan's phone buzzed again on the console. Another message from the unknown number. You can't protect him from what's coming. He gripped the wheel harder. Mason wasn't bluffing. He was letting Ethan know the rules. The city was already his, and Ethan was trespassing. The next message came before Ethan could breathe. Check the alley behind you. Ethan's chest froze. He checked the rear view. A black SUV rolled two cars back, tinted windows swallowing the morning. Noah saw it too. His body stiffened, eyes darting to Ethan's face. Ethan forced his voice steady. Stay calm. The SUV stayed on their tail for 5 blocks. Each turn Ethan made, it followed. Not fast, not reckless, just patient. Like a predator saving its strength. At the 6th block, Ethan jerked the wheel right, then right again, sliding onto narrower streets where warehouses leaned over the asphalt. The SUV followed, headlights slicing through the cracks. Ethan floored it. The Tesla surged, tires spitting water, but the SUV stayed close, too close. Noah clutched the door, breath coming quick. They're not going to stop. I know. Ethan cut hard into another turn. An alley loomed ahead, narrow, trash bins crowding the walls. He slammed the brakes, killed the engine, and pulled Noah down. They crouched in silence as the SUV roared past, its light sweeping over the alley mouth before disappearing. Noah's pulse shook against Ethan's arm. His whisper cut through the dark. He always finds me. If you were hiding in that alley, a child pressed against you, enemies circling the streets, would you fight? Or would you pray the shadows stayed on your side? Comment where you're watching from. They stayed low until the sound faded. Ethan exhaled slowly. We need help, he murmured, more to himself than Noah. Not the police, Mason's reach was too wide. He needed someone who could move in the city's undercurrent. He thought of Rod. Reliable, discreet. He texted one word, Burnside. A meet point they hadn't used in years. Minutes later, they were moving again, cutting south, weaving through streets where streetlights leaned broken and stray dogs searched garbage. Noah never asked where, never argued. He just sat small, eyes fixed on the blur of buildings. The meet point was a forgotten garage on Burnside Avenue, rusted doors tagged with layers of graffiti. Ethan pulled inside. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete. Rod was already there, leaning against a rusted tool chest. Heavy jacket, cigarette in hand, eyes sharp. He flicked the smoke away when he saw Noah. So that's him. Ethan's chest tightened. No names. Rod studied the boy anyway. He looks like you. Noah's jaw clenched. He pulled his hood tighter. Rod turned back to Ethan. Word on the street is your brother's been busy. Real busy. He's got people moving kids, running corners, pushing weight. And everyone says the same thing, he's untouchable. Ethan's throat hardened. Not anymore. Rod shook his head. You don't know this world. Mason owns it. And he's not working alone. There's money behind him. Bigger money than I've seen on these blocks in years. Ethan felt the boy's eyes flick toward him. He didn't look back. He didn't want Noah to see the fear in his face. Then find me the cracks, Ethan said. Everyone has them. Rod smirked faintly. Spoken like a man who's never seen what happens when the cracks bleed. Still, he nodded. There's a man named Kincaid. Runs a warehouse on 79th, used to be small time, now he's Mason's right hand. If anyone knows where the boy fits into this, it's him. The silence that followed was sharp. Noah shifted, his voice barely audible. Don't go there. Ethan turned. Why not? Noah's eyes were fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched. Because that's where they take kids who don't come back. The words chilled the garage. Rod looked away, muttering a curse. Ethan stared at Noah, the weight of the boy's fear anchoring every breath. If someone told you the next place you had to go was where children vanished, would you step inside? Or would you turn back and live with the shame? Tell me where you're watching from. Ethan stood. The choice was already made. We're going. Rod frowned. Then you're walking into hell. Ethan glanced at Noah, who refused to meet his eyes. Hell's where he's been his whole life. I'm not leaving him there. Rod swore again, pulled on his jacket, and grabbed a set of keys from the bench. Then we do this smart. Quiet. We go tonight. Ethan nodded, though the air in his chest felt like stone. Outside, the city stretched, endless and waiting. Mason's reach was everywhere, his warnings crawling through text messages and dark streets. But Ethan knew one thing now, this wasn't just survival anymore. It was a hunt. And he was finally ready to begin. The streets outside the diner were rinsed in a gray light that made everything look colder than it was, slick asphalt, boarded windows, metal gates still locked against the morning. Ethan walked Noah to the car without touching him, because touch could startle a skittish animal and the boy beside him was all bone-wound tension. The Tesla blinked once, Noah slid in, small and guarded, hood framing a face that had learned too early how to disappear inside itself. The car hummed onto the avenue. Storefronts drifted by like missing teeth in a long grin, pawn shops, payday lenders, a bodega with a hand-painted sign promising hot coffee and luck to anyone who still believed in either. Ethan felt the city narrowing around them, blocks tightening, sightlines closing, every corner an eye. He wanted to talk and couldn't. He wanted to promise and didn't dare. The boy stared out, arms crushed tight across his ribs, tracking alleys, porches, doorways, as if survival were a map he knew better than breathing. His phone buzzed on the console. Unknown number. 3 words, you can't keep him. The letters were small and precise and absolute. Another buzz, check the alley behind you. Ethan's glance slid to the mirror. 2 cars back, a black SUV moved like it had decided the day already. Tinted windows, steady pace. Not fast. Patient. The kind of tale that didn't mind being seen. Noah didn't turn his head, but Ethan saw the boy go rigid from the neck down. "Stay calm," he said, and the words felt like throwing a coat over a wildfire. They rolled 3 more blocks. The SUV rolled 3 more blocks. Ethan took a right, then another right, then a longer left through a corridor of shuttered warehouses where weeds shouldered through cracks in the concrete. The SUV followed, headlights lifting and dropping over bumps as if nodding. He punched the accelerator. The Tesla surged, water spitting from the tires. The SUV held, unhurried, as if time itself were working for it. Noah's breath sawed, quiet, fast, controlled, and Ethan felt the boy's gaze touch his hands on the wheel, then return to the mirrors. Survival, memorized. An alley opened like a slit between 2 buildings, narrow and half-choked with bins and pallets. Ethan braked hard, tires bumping the lip, killed the engine, and yanked Noah down with him in one motion. The car ticked and settled. The alley smelled of wet cardboard and iron. Lights washed the alley mouth. The SUV ghosted past, the slow glare licking over brick and trash, then vanished into the wash of morning. The rumble faded. Somewhere beyond the buildings, a train sighed. Somewhere closer, a bottle rolled and clinked until it found a wall. Noah's shoulder pressed against Ethan's bicep, solid, shaking, very real. A whisper scraped out, raw, "He always finds me." Ethan closed his eyes against the flash of rage that wanted to break ribs, walls, anything that made a cage. When he opened them, the alley was still an alley. The boy was still a boy. "Not today," he murmured, and made it a private oath. They waited until silence had edges again. Then he eased them up, slid back behind the wheel, and breathed the car alive. He didn't rejoin the avenue. He threaded side streets instead, narrow lanes lined with chain link, a church with a painted Mary gazing through cracked glass, a corner memorial of candles guttering in yesterday's wind. 3 teenagers shared a scooter built for one. A man in a heavy coat counted something in his palm and closed his fist when the Tesla went by. Noah's voice came like a frayed wire. "He's got people everywhere." Ethan stopped before he said the word. He tried again. "The man from the bridge?" Silence. Then, flat, "He knows things before they happen." Ethan checked the mirror again, saw only his own eyes in the glass. He thought of childhood winters when Mason could read a room in one blink, who was bluffing, who would swing, where the exit was if the exit broke. It wasn't magic. It was the practice of surviving as a profession. They crossed under the L. A train rattled overhead, casting stripes of shadow that shivered across their windshield. The phone buzzed again. He didn't look. He heard the message anyway, because the city had decided to speak in Mason's voice, "You're in my lanes now." They needed help that didn't wear a badge. He typed one word to Rod at a red light that seemed to last an hour, "Burnside." They reached the old garage with the rust-scabbed door and the sagging roofline that always looked like it might finally give up today. Inside, the space opened into a cathedral of grease and echoes, stained concrete, hoists that hadn't held a car in years, a wall of tools arranged in a neatness that said one person here still believed order could hold chaos by the throat. A single bulb buzzed overhead like an insect too stubborn to die. Rod leaned against a steel workbench with his hands in his jacket and his attention already measuring the boy. "So that's him," he said, and flicked a look at Ethan that asked a dozen questions in one lift of eyebrow. "No names," Ethan said. It came out harsher than he meant. Noah's chin tucked lower at the edge. Rod let the look slide off. "Your brother's been busy," he said, matter of fact. "He's got a spine to his operation now. Corners feeding warehouses feeding bank accounts. People who used to work for nobody work for him, and they like not being dead. There's money behind him, real money. New cars in old driveways. Boxes with no labels going in and out at hours the clock doesn't use. Who? Ethan asked. The money. Rod's mouth tipped. If I say a name and it's wrong, it gets you killed. If I say a name and it's right, it gets me killed. But there's a rumor with teeth, a man called Kincaid on 79th, used to run parts and pallets. Now he runs whatever Mason needs moved. And when a kid disappears and doesn't hit a hospital or a jail, when he simply becomes air, folks say Kincaid's floor swallowed him. Noah's hands balled in his sleeves. He stared at the dark oil map spread across the concrete. Don't go there. The 3 words carried too much memory to be just fear. Ethan took a step closer, slow. You've seen it? The boy didn't answer. His silence answered anyway. The garage hummed around them, drip from a pipe, wind worrying at a sheet of corrugated metal. Rod looked away like a man who'd seen a bruise you can't put a bandage on. Describe the entrance, Ethan said, voice low. Noah shrugged shallowly, as if the movement might unlock something he wanted to keep locked. Roll-up door. 2 cameras. The left one's fake. A breath. Guys pretend to smoke by the stairs but they don't. They just watch. Another breath. There's a dog that doesn't bark. Rod whistled, soft and without humor. Kid's not wrong. Ethan felt the shape of the place assemble in his head, the door, the blind spot in the camera cone, the men who stood still without standing guard, the dog trained to warn with silence. He built it the way he'd built boardrooms and acquisitions, piece by ruthless piece, but this time the blueprint stank of bleach and lost voices. Why would they want you? He asked, and immediately hated the question's past tense. Noah's stare didn't lift. Because she told me not to be found. It was barely breath, barely motion. And they like finding what's not supposed to be found. Claire's warning on the sidewalk came back raw and wet, don't let them take him. Ethan's fingers tightened against a uselessness he hadn't felt since childhood. The garage sloped a fraction, the world did with it. If someone you loved told you the only safe place was the one place you couldn't reach, would you go anyway? Or would you let fear keep you from the door? Tell me where you're watching from. Rod dragged a stool with a squeal that made Noah flinch despite himself. He sat, elbows on knees. You want this clean, he said to Ethan. You don't get clean. You want it fast. Fast gets you dead. You want it quiet. Quiet doesn't move the people who need noise to feel alive. I want him safe, Ethan said. It came out steady, finally. Then we need a key, Rod said. Nobody walks into Kincaid without a reason that smells right. We can fake paperwork, but the breath test gets you. We need someone already inside who owes me more than he fears them. He stared at a list taped to the wall, a sprawl of names with marks beside some, XS by others, asterisks by 3. He tapped one of the asterisks. Raphael. Drives a forklift Tuesdays and Thursdays. Gambles like hope's a habit. He owes me rent on a life I saved him from. If he's still breathing, he'll answer. Rod dialed, turned his back, lowered his voice. Ethan tried not to listen and heard everything anyway, Rod's soft bait, the small choke in a man recognizing a voice he thought he'd never hear again, the long pause when 79th was said out loud. Then the click of a decision made under a bad sky. Rod pocketed the phone. He'll meet us near the old feed store at 9. He won't stand still. He won't talk long. And if we spook him, he'll be a rumor by noon. Ethan's relief rose like a tide and hit a wall labeled trap. And if Mason's already bought him? Then we learn it the hard way, Rod said. Like always. Ethan turned to Noah. The boy had moved 2 steps away without moving at all, a slow retreat inside himself. Ethan could feel the distance like cold air. There's one thing I need you to hear, he said, choosing each word like footing on ice. I can't undo the years I wasn't there. I can't make you feel safe because I say it. But I can put my body between you and whatever's coming. I can do that now. Noah's mouth tightened, not a smile. People say that. Then they stop saying it. Ethan nodded once, absorbing it the way you absorb a punch that rings the bell in your skull. I won't stop. Another silence. Then, very quietly, like he wasn't meaning to give anything, they don't use the front at night, Noah said. There's a loading bay off the alley. Smells like cat food. If the blue light is on, it means they're counting. Nobody watches the back stairs when they're counting. Rod looked at Ethan like the boy had just handed them the shape of the gate. That's a crack, he said. Noah immediately folded in, as if he regretted the gift. Ethan didn't push, didn't praise, didn't ruin it with adult gratitude. He just memorized blue light and back stairs and a smell he would never again be able to separate from this morning. They left the garage near 8. The sky had brightened to the color of a bruise that was almost done being angry. Ethan tucked the phone under the console, killed every notification except Rod's, and drove without the navigation this time. Noah watched the streets, inventorying danger, checking blind corners with the professionalism of a boy who had never been paid to be alive. Halfway to 79th, their lane pinched down to 1. Construction cones, a hole in the world, a city crew that wouldn't look at them even if the car burst into flame. Ethan felt his pulse tap at the base of his throat. He pictured the SUV idling 2 blocks back, patient as a tide. He pictured Mason leaning against a wall somewhere, head bowed, not praying. The feed store sat like an antique at the edge of a broad emptiness that used to hold something and now held dust. Rod parked them 3 cars away from themselves without moving his own vehicle, an old trick he'd learned from ghosts. They waited. The wind picked up. A bag skittered down the sidewalk and plastered itself against a grate like it was trying to escape the day. A man peeled off the far corner and came in broken diagonal lines, never straight, never predictable, always ready to turn into nothing. Baseball cap low, jacket zipped, shoulders that knew forklifts. Raphael. He didn't look at them until he was beside Rod, and even then he looked past, like the street across the street had better news. Rod kept his hands where everyone could see them. We need a count night, he said, too soft for the wind. Raphael swallowed, throat working. 9:30. Thursdays. Today's not Thursday. Then today's a favor, Rod said. You owe me 1. I owe you 3, Raphael said, and a bitter smile stuttered across his mouth. That's what scares me. He flicked a glance at Noah, quick and gone. If he goes in, he doesn't come out the door he used, he said. Not if the man upstairs decides he fits. Man upstairs? Ethan asked. Raphael lifted his chin toward a portion of air that didn't look like anything. Not God. He shifted his weight, eyes chopping the block. Backstairs, like the boy said. Blue light means numbers. 10 minutes after the light goes off, men argue about nothing. That's your window. It's not a door. It's a shutter with a latch that sticks if the air is wet. The air was wet. Ethan felt the city breathe through the fabric of his jacket. Raphael stepped away as if pulled. You didn't see me, he said, and meant you won't see me again. Rod didn't try to hold him. Go slow, he said to the man's back, which was already gone. Ethan stood very still. The plan assembled itself in his head with a fatal logic: watch the light, count the minutes, slip the shutter, take the stairs that smelled like cat food, move toward the kind of quiet that held breath. He felt what it would cost and knew he would pay it because the only thing worse was not walking into that dark. He turned to the boy. You stay with Rod. You move if he moves. You don't stop moving if he says move. Noah stared at him like a puzzle with pieces missing. What if you don't come back? Then Rod gets you to the hospital, Ethan said. To Claire. He didn't add if she's still alive. He kept that part for himself, a stone he could hold when his hands needed something to do. If you were about to step into the place where children vanish, would you still go if the only thing you could carry was your promise? Or would you watch the light and pretend it never turned off? Comment where you're watching from. The wind freshened, carrying the smell of rain and metal and something else that made Ethan's mouth taste like pennies. Far down the block, a narrow door above a loading bay glowed blue. It looked harmless, like a mistake the building had made and never fixed. The light held. Then flickered. Then went dark. The blue light died like a signal meant only for them. One blink, then nothing, leaving the warehouse door blank and ordinary. Ordinary except for the silence that pressed against it, heavy and watchful. Ethan stood in the alley with Rod, the wet stink of garbage and rust bleeding into his lungs. The boy waited in the car, eyes too wide, hood drawn low, watching every corner as if Mason might materialize out of brick. Rod muttered, "This is your window." 10 minutes before they noticed the count's done. Ethan nodded. His chest felt like iron cracking. Every deal he'd ever made had started with the same step, crossing a threshold. Tonight, the threshold wasn't a boardroom. It was a shutter that smelled of rot and blood. Rod jimmied the latch. The door groaned, protesting, then gave. Darkness poured out, thick, carrying the scent of dust, chemicals, something coppery beneath. Ethan slipped inside. Rod followed, pulling the shutter low behind them. The interior swallowed sound. Concrete floor slick with damp. Crates stacked into crooked towers, shadows deepening between them. A single bulb buzzed far above, too high to cut through the gloom. Ethan's shoes whispered. His breath rasped. Rod moved like a man who had learned to breathe quieter than fear. They passed a row of crates stamped with symbols that weren't shipping codes. Ethan trailed his fingers over one, fresh paint, tacky to the touch. Letters he didn't recognize, but the meaning was obvious: ownership. Mason's ownership. Voices echoed faintly ahead. Two men arguing over numbers. One slammed something metallic against wood. Ethan froze, Rod tugged him sideways, and they melted into the crease between two stacks. The men passed close, one dragging a clipboard, the other counting bills. Ethan caught a phrase, Donovan's file. His blood iced. He leaned forward, ears straining. Boss says keep it locked. She was insurance. Now she's a liability. Their footsteps faded, the words still burning. Claire. Her name here, in this place, tied to insurance and liability. Rod's eyes flicked sharp. Did you hear that? Ethan nodded, a storm roaring in his chest. They moved deeper. Past crates, past the humming generator that coughed smoke into the rafters, until a stairwell dropped into a basement that smelled of mildew and secrets. Rod hesitated. Ethan went first. The basement was colder, lined with filing cabinets scarred by rust. A single desk sat beneath a low bulb. On it, scattered papers, a photograph, and a ledger thick with names. Ethan's hand shook as he picked up the photo. Claire. Younger, hair pulled back, standing beside Mason. Her smile tight, forced. A boy blurred in the background, Noah. Smaller, maybe 7. The edges were torn, as if someone had tried to erase half the memory. The ledger burned next. Pages filled with numbers, initials, street corners. And under one column, bold letters, ND. Noah Donovan. His chest collapsed. Mason hadn't just been keeping the boy alive. He'd been cataloging him. Like property. Like a piece on a board. If you found your child's name inked inside a ledger of debts and shadows, would you keep reading, or would you set the book on fire? Comment where you're watching from. Rod hissed softly. We need to move. Now. But Ethan wasn't done. His eyes fell on a scrap wedged under the ledger. A hospital intake form. Claire's. The date blurred, the signature smeared, but the words clear enough: complications. Patient unstable. It wasn't just Mason running this. Claire's illness, her collapse, it was all tied. The stairwell creaked above. Heavy boots. Voices. Rod shoved the papers back, snapping the ledger shut. He grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him into the shadows just as two men descended, flashlights cutting white scars through the dark. "Check the cabinets," one muttered. "Boss wants the files cleared." Ethan's pulse hammered. If they found the photo, the ledger, the intake form, proof would vanish. He held his breath, every muscle screaming. Rod leaned close, voice no louder than thought, "We can't take the fight here. We get out. We use what we know." Ethan's throat burned, but he nodded. They slipped along the far wall, edging toward another door, one that smelled of damp earth. The flashlights swept inches from their backs. Then, Rod shoved, the door gave, and they spilled into night air. They crouched in the alley, lungs clawing for air. The city loomed around them, indifferent. The boy pressed against the car window, his face pale, eyes locked on them. Ethan staggered forward, chest hollow, the photograph burned into his vision. Claire. Mason. Noah. Together, years stolen from him. Rod slammed the shutter behind them, locking secrets in. "You've got your truth," he growled. "Now you've got your war." Across the city, in a sterile hospital room, monitors beeped steady until one spiked. Claire's eyes shot open. She gasped a name, Ethan, and the sound rasped through tubes and wires. A nurse rushed to her side, fumbling for the call button. In the hallway, a man closed his phone with quiet finality. "Mason." He smiled without warmth, then walked away before anyone could ask who he was. The city towered in glass and steel, but Ethan wasn't driving toward light. Rod had traced Mason's trail to a skeleton building at the edge of the south side, half-built before the money ran out, left to rot. Its windows were holes, its concrete floors open to rain. It was the kind of place Mason would choose, no cameras, no witnesses, only echoes. Ethan killed the headlights a block away. He could see figures moving in the high floors, silhouettes pacing against empty sky. He turned to Noah in the back seat. "This ends tonight." The boy didn't answer. His hands were fists in his lap, his hood shadowing his eyes. But he didn't look away. Rod handed Ethan a crowbar, nothing polished, nothing expensive. "Best deals are signed in blood," he muttered. "Be sure it's not yours." Ethan gripped the metal. It felt wrong and right at the same time. The stairwell stank of mold and rust. Every step upward groaned, each sound magnified into the hollow skeleton of the tower. Noah trailed behind him, light as a shadow, refusing to stay in the car no matter how Ethan argued. On the 13th floor, the air opened into a wide space framed by concrete pillars. Rain swept in through broken windows, mist curling over the floor. And at the center, Mason waited. He stood with his back to the city, arms folded, jacket loose. Two of his men lingered near the far wall, silent, statues carved from muscle and malice. "You made it," Mason said. His voice carried easily. "Didn't think you had the stomach." Ethan stepped forward, crowbar low at his side. "Let him go." Mason's eyes flicked to Noah. The boy hovered at Ethan's shoulder, torn between running and standing still. Mason's smile was small, bitter. "He followed you here. That's not letting go. That's choosing." Ethan's jaw clenched. "He's not yours." Mason tilted his head. "Not yours either." "Not really. Where were you when he learned to watch the door every night? When he learned silence keeps you breathing?" "I was there." "You weren't." Noah flinched. Ethan felt it like a knife. If someone threw your failures into your child's ears, would you fight harder, or break beneath the truth? Comment where you're watching from. Ethan's voice ground out. "You used him." Mason's expression hardened. I kept him alive. You caged him. I taught him the rules. Their words clashed like blades, each one cutting deeper. The rain thickened against the broken windows, thunder rolling distant. Mason moved closer, his men shifting behind him. You don't get to walk in now and rewrite his story. Blood isn't ownership. You can't erase what I gave him. Ethan raised the crowbar, not in threat, but in declaration. Watch me. The tension snapped. One of Mason's men surged forward. Rod met him halfway, fists cracking bone against concrete. The other drew steel, but Ethan swung, the crowbar ringing off the blade, sparks spitting into rain. Noah pressed against the wall, eyes wide, caught between terror and awe. Mason didn't move. He only watched, expression unreadable, until Ethan shoved the man back and stood, chest heaving, crowbar slick with blood and rain. Still standing, Mason said softly. Always thought you'd fall first. Rod wrestled the second man down, his breath sharp, his hands sure. Go, he barked. End this. Ethan faced Mason fully. The brothers stood with only Noah between them. Mason's eyes locked on the boy. Tell him, Mason said. His voice softened, almost tender. Tell him who kept you alive. Who fed you when she couldn't. Who gave you the tools to survive. Noah's lips parted. His chest rose and fell, fast. His gaze slid from Mason to Ethan, torn, raw. Ethan lowered the crowbar, his voice breaking. You don't owe me trust. You don't owe me love. But you're my son. And I will burn this whole city down before I let him own you. Noah's breath caught. For the first time, his eyes locked steady on Ethan. Not wary. Not guarded. Just searching. Mason saw it. His face cracked. Rage twisted his mouth. He lunged. Ethan met him head-on. The brothers collided, a storm of fists and steel and years of betrayal. Mason was heavier, seasoned in dirt and alleys. Ethan was driven, powered by something new, the knowledge of what had been stolen, the boy watching. They crashed against a pillar, concrete shuddering. Mason's hands closed on Ethan's throat. Ethan's vision dimmed. He forced his arms upward, crowbar jammed between them, shoving Mason back. The fight was raw, ugly. No finesse. Just bone and fury. Then Noah's voice cut through. Dad. The word froze them both. Mason faltered, the grip slackening for 1 second. Ethan seized it, drove the crowbar into his brother's ribs, not killing, but breaking. Mason collapsed, gasping, fury pouring out of him like blood. Rod dragged the last of Mason's men away. The space fell into silence, broken only by rain and Mason's ragged breath. Ethan stood over him, chest heaving. It ends here. Mason spat red onto the floor. His smile was twisted. It never ends. If you were standing above the brother who stole your family, would you finish it? Or would you walk away carrying his shadow forever? Tell me where you're watching from. Ethan dropped the crowbar. It clanged against concrete, final. He turned, reaching for Noah. The boy stepped forward, slowly, then closed the space, his hand slipping into Ethan's for the first time. Rod limped to the stairwell. We need to move. Cops'll come, or worse. They left Mason on the floor, his laughter hollow against the rain. At Northwestern Memorial, Claire's monitors pulsed steady. Her eyes fluttered open again, searching the room. She whispered a name, Noah, before slipping back into sleep. In the distance, sirens wailed. In the tower, Mason pulled himself upright, rage and blood on his lips, his promise echoing in the empty dark. Ethan drove into the city with Noah at his side. No words. Just the silence of two lives bent toward something new. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, it wasn't lost.